When we consider the opportunities that smart cities offer, we probably have our mind on more terrestrial solutions. But what if we look upward? In the past decade, a revolution has started in the civilian space industry. The old space needed a huge corporations with hundreds of engineers and a huge budget to build and launch satellites into space. Today, we are swarms of cubesats or nano-satellites in space designed for specific purposes, whether to supply global internet connectivity, monitoring shipping lanes, or helping in urban planning. To help us understand how the new space movement will support smart city management, I would like to invite Dr. Colin Price, head of the Department of the Environmental Studies at the University of Tel Aviv, to join me on the virtual stage. Hello, Dr. Price.
Hello, good evening, good morning.
Good morning, good evening, and now the virtual stage is all yours.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So thank you for inviting me to be here. I was asked to speak about the link between space and smart cities. And we're actually going through a new era, even a revolution in civilian space, which we call new space. On this first image, you may see these three little boxes in the middle of the image. These are three satellites. These are what we call nano-satellites or cubesats. Each one is about the size of a shoebox. So these are very small. They weigh only a few kilograms. You can hold them in your hand. And this is really a new era in the space industry. And as I mentioned, this is a revolution which is occurring in space. And we call this new space in comparison with old space. The old space basically was accessible only to the big players, the few big national players like NASA, the European Space Agency, the Canadian Space Agency, Japanese, and even the Israel aircraft industry. But each satellite was huge. It was the size of a car or a bus, cost more than hundreds of millions of dollars. You needed a dedicated rocket to get your satellite to space. It was also one of a kind, so that you would have to redesign everything from scratch for your next satellite. Would take more than 10 years and hundreds of engineers. Today, this new revolution of new space means that anyone has access to space. Even high school students are building satellites now to space, and startup companies, universities. As I mentioned, the size of these satellites are the size of a shoebox and are less than $1 million, including the launch. The launch is about half of the cost. And unlike the old space, we can actually hitchhike a ride to space with the SpaceX module taking supplies to the space station, or on a bigger launch waiting for a place to be available. The hardware of these satellites is all modular, and you can buy it off the shelf. So you can buy the computers, you can buy the sensors, the solar panels, everything needed. And this makes it much cheaper and much faster to get to space. You can do this in less than 2 years, and a bunch of students can actually do this at the moment. Now, the reason this is occurring is because we're having disruptive innovation here. The whole space industry and the nano-satellite, cube-satellite industry is going to a standardization where people can share technologies, they can share instrumentation, and they're called cubesats because they're made up of these cubes, which are approximately 10 by 10 by 10 centimeters, and you can put these together to, here you have a 1 unit, 2 unit, 3U, 6, 12 units. You can put these together like Lego, and all the instrumentation, the computers, the batteries, your sensors are inside these boxes, and on the outside we have the solar panels which give the energy for running the systems inside. And everything, as I mentioned, is modular. There's a standard, and so everything, you can buy the computer boards for online. Even on the internet today, you can buy various instruments which are used for the turning of the satellites, the monitoring, the communication of the data back down to the ground. And so there's a huge community now working on the same modular satellites, and therefore there's a lot of help out there, a lot of information, and collaborations. Now, this is taking off, this industry. If we look at the total number of nano-satellite cube satellites in space, just in the last 10 years, this has taken off, and we have now more than 1,000, maybe 1,500 of these small satellites up in space. And because even the prices are going down, and the experience people are getting, and the utility of space, this is really going to be a much bigger business in the next decade. And here's a picture of how they get launched, actually. Most of them go up to the International Space Station, say with the SpaceX cargo shipment, and are released through this little box by satellite, by the astronauts. And there's a little box with a spring. You just push a switch and it spits out these little satellites into space. These two satellites are actually from a startup company, which some of you may have heard of Planet Labs. Here you can see one of their satellites, this animation. And again, this is the size of a shoebox. And they have now more than 150 of these satellites orbiting the Earth. And the goal of Planet is to basically take an image of the Earth every day, every spot on the planet of the Earth, every day at a resolution of between 3 to 5 meters. So if you're interested in monitoring various aspects of your infrastructure in your city, traffic, building codes, whatever, you can get an image every day of your city at a resolution of 3 to 5 meters. And this is available even today. But more than just images, another company, OneWeb, is trying to give internet connectivity to the entire world from space. So bringing broadband communication networks to communities, governments, businesses all over the world by this network of small satellites, giving basically internet to everyone, everywhere on Earth, especially developing countries and cities in developing countries, which have poor infrastructures today. And this is going to have amazing consequences, and will have connectivity quality similar to fiber optic networks that we have today. This will be a game changer for many of the developing countries and their cities, allowing them also to become smart cities using satellite communications. So what do we see for the use of space in smart cities? Well, we can make our cities more efficient when we're talking about urban planning. If we want to look at land use management, property tax evaluation, illegal buildings, or transport and mobility, real-time information on connectivity, urban traffic analysis. When we talk about buildings and infrastructure, we can monitor the pavements, buildings, the critical infrastructure. We can map buried optical cables, gas, water, electric lines, and soil subsidence maps to prioritize where we have to send maintenance teams. We also want to make our cities of the future safer and more resilient. If we talk about disasters and security, we want to manage better the natural disasters, oil spill detection and removal, analysis of crime incident patterns, and for soil and water, remote sensing of reservoirs, hazardous material management, and even urban agriculture in the future. So just to show a few examples before I end, here we have a satellite image of air pollution over China, Southeast Asia. Beijing is over here, Shanghai down here. All this gray cloud is air pollution. And this has a direct effect on, say, renewable energies or solar energy farms that we may want to build in the future. And so we can use satellites to actually map out the best places to build your solar energy farms. For example, here we can see in this map the reduction in the efficiency of solar energy, the reduction in the photovoltaic generation due to what we call aerosols, which are small particles, air pollution in the air. And this is given in kilowatt hours per square meter per day. And we can see that in the Beijing, Shanghai area, because of all the pollution, it's very inefficient actually to generate solar energy compared, say, with Tibet, which is both higher up and cleaner. So this can be used for cities, counties, countries even, for planning of where they want to put their solar energy farms. A company in Israel, Utilis, a startup company, is detecting water pipe leaks from space. Here we can see Birmingham in the United Kingdom, and all the yellow lines here are where the satellite has detected water leaks, and potential for water leaks. So this can be used by the cities to go and investigate water leaks. It's also saving on resources for the city, but also for the public, for the residents. If there's a leak nearby, you can determine where the leaks are, and this can be used for managing infrastructures across the city. We can monitor the activity in ports. Here's an image, a satellite image from Rotterdam in Holland, and satellite surveillance can monitor the container traffic, storing, the stacking of raw materials, like we can see here of iron ore in the harbor, and the number of vessels in the port. And you can analyze this and estimate the port's revenue growth. You can develop macroeconomic indicators of the health of the port and even of the European economy by monitoring the harbors from space. For individual companies like oil industry, you have images from North Carolina from September 2003 to January 2008. What we see here is that satellites can actually monitor the refineries and the throughput of oil and gas through the refineries. We can measure the number of tanks, the construction of new tanks, as well as the fill level of the tanks. You can see the shadows here on some of these tanks. These tanks actually have an adjustable roof that is lowered as the product, the oil, the gas, is removed from the tank so that gas vapors won't collect. So the height of the roof tells you something about how much gas or oil you have inside these tanks. So satellites can be used to monitor this continuously. We can also keep your eye on your competitor. Here we can see the number of cars, we can count the number of cars parked in the Walmart parking lot. This can be used for Walmart if they want to monitor their business, or the competitors of Walmart. If you want to see how your competitors are doing, you can use images from space to simply monitor the number of people coming to buy every day at Walmart. So I'll end here just to say that this was a booming business. It's increased dramatically just in the last 10 years. The investment in space, in the civilian space, we're going up to more than $22 billion in the last years. More than 500 companies are getting investment related to space, whether it's the actual building of the satellites, the launches, the media, education, or the sensors, or actual companies which are looking at industries and monitoring things from space. We also have the commercial industry of transportation. The SpaceX and others are now being able to take us nanoracks, which are the actual launches of these cubesats into space. And so this is an industry which is really taking off, and it's only going to thrive in the coming years and the coming decades, and can be used directly to study cities and make the cities smarter and hopefully also sustainable cities in the future. And as we like to say in the space industry, the sky is not the limit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Price. There's a question from Renato. With the quantity of satellites already circulating around the Earth and tons of debris, aren't they concerned about safety and orbit pollution? And if so, can you tell us more about plans of debris collection?
Excellent question. So these small satellites, first of all, there are two main orbits for satellites. One is called the low Earth orbit, which is around about between 400 to say 800 kilometers. The satellites in that orbit have still a small amount of friction with the air around the Earth. And so these satellites don't last more than a few years. They eventually start to fall down. And when they hit the atmosphere, which is at about 100 kilometers, they burn up. And they basically will not last for more than a few years, and they'll disintegrate. The ones which occur much higher up, the communication satellites in what we call the geostationary orbit, those are there basically for decades maybe. And it is a problem. We talk about space debris, and some of you may have seen the movie Gravity, when you have even a little small speck of dirt which can, or a little piece of paint or a screw which can bang into a satellite or the space station and cause a lot of damage. And so this is a topic which people are working on, trying to even develop other satellites which can go and clean up space. There's some startup companies which are looking at taking act like a harpoon with a big net and going to collect space debris out in space. So this is definitely a potential problem for the future. The more access we have to space, the easier it is to get to space, the more satellites we'll have up there. But on the other hand, there's a lot of space up there. There's a lot of space which can be used just has to be managed correctly.
Another question that I have, and it might not be the smartest one, but because I'm not an expert in the subject, I was wondering, eventually, will we be talking about where the information comes from, what satellites it comes from? I was thinking about data center. We always want to make sure that the data center, let's say, are the same regulation or in the same country. Do you think it's going to be one day the same thing with the satellites?
Yeah, so at the moment, a lot of the data is controlled by whoever owns the satellite. But when we talk about Earth observations, most of the observations today are still taken by the big players like NASA, the European Space Agency, the Canadian, and these have clear protocols for defining the data, the formats of the data, and all of this data, which is funded by the public, is open access. So everyone can go and download that data and use it for your research, for monitoring cities. Obviously, the private companies like Planet Lab are charging for the data, but even that is not very expensive. But there should be some standardized formats, I suppose, and regulations for all the data in the future.
Another one that I have is I was wondering, we're talking about 5G, but eventually it's going to be the 6, 7, 8G. Is there a correlation or relationship with the high speed, very high speed internet and the satellites that we have?
Well, the satellites will be kind of wireless because there's no physical cable there. So I'm sure that the bandwidth will increase with time. I'm not sure how it'll compete with the rates we have on the ground, 5G, 6G in the future, but it'll definitely be, say, fiber optic quality. So you'll be able to do things that you can do with fiber optics on the ground today. You'll be able to do that from space in the middle of the Sahara Desert in the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Price. That's all the time that we have. And where can we follow you? And if we have more questions, do you have a Twitter account?
Tel Aviv University. You can just look for Colin Price, Tel Aviv University. I'm the only one there with that name.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.